Sir, the sky's about to crack open. Jack Turner's words barely registered as the spa's front door burst inward, rain lashing the tiled floor droplets, clattering like bullets against the reception desk. A figure in a charcoal silk dress stood there, drenched and defiant, eyes blazing beneath water-dark curls. Claire Hart's entrance wasn't just dramatic. It was an urgent plea wrapped in power. In that pulse-pounding instant, the quiet order of Jack's world snapped free, and everything that followed would hinge on one impossible offer. If this moment has you gripping your seat, hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe so you won't miss a second of Claire and Jack's unforgettable journey. Jack Turner paused mid-fold, the last crisp white towel suspended between his hands, like a question unanswered. Steam curled from the eucalyptus diffuser in the corner, mingling with the soft amber glow overhead, and painting the room in muted gold. Outside, the rain drummed a relentless rhythm on the spa's corrugated metal roof, an undercurrent of urgency that seeped through the walls. He glanced up at the woman who'd strode into his sanctuary unannounced. Claire Hart, CEO of Hartwell Enterprises, rumor had it housed an empire of skyscrapers and boardrooms in that slender frame. Tonight, though, she was elemental water trickling down her silk gown, eyes glittering with something like desperation. "You said you'd be here," she said, voice steady despite the tremor at the edges. Her tone carried a weight that even the spa's padded silence couldn't cushion. Jack folded the towel with deliberate calm. "I am," he replied. "But this isn't a session, is it?" Claire inhaled the silk at her throat, rippling like dark water. She lifted a sleek leather clutch from under her arm and eased it open. Inside lay a thin stack of bills, crisp enough to thicken someone's bank account beyond measure. "I need a night of rest," she said. "I'll pay you $1 million to sit beside me in silence. No touching, no conversation, just your presence." Her words fell in the air like a challenge. Jack's heartbeat ratcheted up, not from greed, but from the audacity of it all. In 15 years of massage therapy, he'd met clients with the strangest requests. Late-night deep rest treatments for exhausted executives, silent retreats for celebrities. But offering a fortune for him to merely exist, that was something else. He slipped the towel onto the oak cabinet, the wood cool beneath his fingers. "You sure you got the right number?" he asked softly. She squared her shoulders. "My people say you're discreet, reliable. I want someone who won't pretend or profit from my exhaustion." Jack studied her profile in the golden light, a high cheekbone here, a pinched jaw there. He sensed the calculation behind every move, the boardroom mindset that turned people into assets. Yet something broken lurked behind her gaze, something he recognized from his own sleepless nights as a single father. Against the swell of rain, he crossed to the cabinet and turned palms open. "I don't sell my presence," he said evenly. "Not for that price. Not for any price." Claire's eyes flickered surprise, then something like grudging respect. The silence stretched long enough for Jack to catch his reflection in the spa mirror. Tired eyes, a trace of salt and pepper in his beard, shoulders braced against a life of carrying more than his share. He wondered if she saw the years in him, the nights spent comforting his daughter Emma after nightmares. Or maybe she just saw a man who refused to bow. "Why not?" she asked, voice low. He leaned back against the cabinet, the grain rough against his shirt. "Because I made a promise. My daughter needs to know her father isn't for sale." Claire's breath caught. For a heartbeat, the CEO's practiced poise slipped away, replaced by raw urgency. "You don't understand," she said, stepping forward. Water dripped from her sleeves onto the floor. "I can't sleep. Not for a year. My mind, it never stops." Jack's gaze softened. He'd seen that hollow look in the eyes of refugees, war veterans, anyone who'd chased success only to find emptiness. He wanted to tell her that silence wasn't a commodity, it was a sanctuary. But he'd learned long ago that silence spoke loudest when left unbroken. He straightened, voice calm. "Then find someone who can help you rest without selling your soul." "I'm not that person." Claire's lips curved in a razor-thin line. She reached into her clutch again and produced a single photograph, an image of her in a boardroom, arms folded, face unreadable. "You refuse $1 million," she said. "But can you refuse—" She let the question hang. Jack's pulse throbbed in his throat. "I'm sorry," he said, stepping past her toward the door. "But I don't think you're buying what you think." He opened the door to the lounge beyond a small waiting area, sofas and low tables arranged under dim sconces. "The lounge is open till 11, he added softly. "If you need silence, you're welcome. No charge." Claire stood framed in the doorway, rain tracing rivulets down her silhouette. The clock on the wall ticked loudly as if marking the moment her world tilted. She swallowed, then nodded once. Sharply, acceptance threaded with something like relief. Jack closed the door behind her. Through the frosted glass, he saw her settle onto a sofa. Posture-perfect, hands folded, eyes fixed on the empty parking lot. No phone. No laptop. Just her and the hush she craved. He returned to the treatment room, folded another towel, but his mind lingered on the image of her alone in the dark. He couldn't explain why he'd offered her the lounge instead of walking away entirely. Maybe because he recognized a desperate need that money couldn't touch. Outside, the rain eased into a steady patter. Inside, the spa's lights glowed warm, harboring a fragile peace. Jack finished his chore, then paused at the spa entrance. He pressed his hand against the cool glass and whispered, "Sleep well." He turned away before she could reply. In that measured act, no grand gesture, no fanfare. He sealed an unspoken pact she wouldn't buy his silence tonight, but she'd find something far more elusive, a man who believed in rest enough to share it freely. And so under the amber light and the lullaby of rain, their story began not with wealth or coercion, but with a single unwavering no. Claire Hart woke before dawn the next morning, her silk gown damp against the memory of last night's rain. Outside, a pale gray light seeped through the lounge window, turning the steam from her shoulders into mist that hovered in the hush. She sat very still, as if movement might shatter the fragile calm that had settled around her, a calm she had never before allowed herself to feel. She glanced at the empty chair beside her and felt its absence like a physical ache. Jack Turner's refusal and unexpected kindness replayed in her mind, no demand, no performance, just an offer of genuine rest. That simple gesture, offered without an agenda, had cracked open something in her armor. Claire rose and smoothed the folds of her dress, reluctantly accepting that she couldn't simply leave this place behind. She walked slowly to the treatment room door, hand resting on the frame, and hesitated. The amber glow still pulsed warmly within, casting gentle shadows across the tidy cabinets, and soothing scents of eucalyptus and lavender. A place so ordinary, so unremarkable, and yet so utterly alien to her world of skyscrapers and steel. Jack was already there, folding fresh towels with the same deliberate care as the night before. When he looked up, his eyes held no judgment, only quiet acknowledgement. Claire realized it was the first time in years someone had looked at her without assessing the power she wielded. "Good morning," Jack said, voice low and neutral. The steam from the diffuser curled around him, framing his silhouette like a halo of simplicity. "Good morning," she replied, unable to mask the tremor in her tone. She stepped into the room, the overhead lights casting a soft glow on the lines of his face, the hint of fatigue at his jaw. He wore a faded gray polo and well-worn jeans, his clothes as unpretentious as his manner. Claire swallowed. "Thank you. For last night." She paused, shifting her weight. "For the blanket." Jack set the towel down and nodded. He didn't offer to explain. It wasn't his way. Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable this time, but rich with possibility. I've never been here before," she admitted, gesturing around the room. "I've never let anyone see me like that. Just exhausted." Jack reached for a fresh towel and began the slow rhythmic folds that had become a kind of meditation for him. "Most people bring their phones or their laptops," he said quietly. "They multitask. They pretend even when they're tired." Claire's gaze dropped to her shoes. Pretend she echoed voice barely above the hush. "I've been pretending for so long that I forgot what it felt like not to." Jack folded the towel into a small square, then placed it atop a stack with precise care. "You don't have to pretend here," he said. "This place, it's real. No facades." Claire closed her eyes, letting the words settle. She thought of the boardrooms where she commanded respect, where every smile and nod was a transaction, a performance choreographed to maintain an image. Here, among the beige walls and diffused steam, her title meant nothing. She was simply a woman who couldn't sleep. She lifted her head, her eyes meeting his. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, voice gentle but firm. "Why not just walk away?" Jack paused as if choosing his next words with the same care he folded his towels. "Because I've been where you are," he said. "I've chased things that didn't fill me up. I've watched money buy everything except what matters most." He looked out the window at the gray dawn, and I know what a person needs when they can't sleep, someone who doesn't expect anything in return. Claire studied him, her analytical mind racing to categorize this man whose life should have been defined by struggle, but instead exuded contentment. She saw a man who built his home with his own hands, who traded prestige for peace, who measured success by his daughter's laughter, rather than a bottom line. "How did you learn that?" she asked, surprised by her own curiosity. He smiled a brief wry curve that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "My daughter," he said simply. "Emma once told me she was proud of my hands because they fixed things and I could feel what people needed." He tilted his head. "When money can't fix you, you learn to see what really does." Claire felt something shift inside her, a recognition that all her wealth had never given her that kind of clarity. She wanted to reach out to touch his arm, but hesitated, remembering his rules: no touching unless it meant something real. Instead, she crossed the room and stood before him, her presence filling the space. "I don't know how to stop pretending," she confessed. "I've built everything on performance. If I let go, who am I?" Jack folded the last towel, then set it aside. He turned to face her fully. "You're not the performances you've given the world," he said. "You're someone who deserves rest, who deserves truth. You're someone who deserves to be seen without armor, without expectations." A single tear slipped down Claire's cheek. She brushed it away, chastising herself for the vulnerability, yet grateful for the release. For the first time in years, she let herself feel something other than ambition or fear. She felt hope. Without a word, Jack stepped forward and offered her a plain white spa robe from the cabinet. "Put this on," he said softly. "Then meet me in the lounge. I'll make you a cup of tea." Claire took the robe in her trembling hands. It felt impossibly soft, a tactile promise of something new. She nodded, once turned, and slipped into the lounge, the hem brushing the carpet like a gentle invitation. Jack followed silently, carrying a steaming teapot and two mismatched mugs he must have fetched from somewhere in the back. He poured the amber liquid and handed one mug to her. The warmth seeped into her palms, steadying her. They sat side by side on the worn leather sofa, the morning light pooling on the floor. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the parking lot glazed like a mirror. Neither spoke. They simply existed in the quiet communion of shared silence. Finally, Claire took a tentative sip of the tea. Its mild sweetness and subtle mint wove around her senses, anchoring her in the present. She set the mug down and exhaled a sound that carried the weight of sleepless nights and endless board meetings. "Thank you," she said, looking at him with a sincerity that needed no embellishment. "For this, for your words, for your silence." Jack offered a small nod, eyes kind. "Rest well," he replied. "And remember, silence isn't empty. It's full of everything you've been too busy to feel." Claire sat back watching him, this man who had shown her that authenticity was more valuable than any paycheck. In the soft morning glow, she realized that their worlds might be different, but their needs were the same. She needed to learn how to be human again, and he needed someone to remind him why he'd chosen this life. As the light brightened and the city beyond the windows woke to another day, Claire felt a flicker of courage. She picked up her mug and took another sip, allowing herself to be present in a way she never had. In that moment, she knew the clash of their worlds was not a barrier, but a bridge, one that would lead her toward a rest she'd long forgotten was possible. Claire Hart awoke to the soft hum of the diffuser, the rhythmic hiss of eucalyptus-scented steam curling into the early morning air like a whispered lullaby. Her eyelids fluttered open against the muted glow of the lounge's wall sconces, and for a moment she lay still, drinking in the unfamiliar comfort of the moment. The plush navy blue sofa beneath her felt impossibly gentle, its cushions molded to the curve of her body. The beige walls and simple wooden cabinet in the corner stood witness to a simplicity she had once dismissed as inconsequential. But tonight, in her exhaustion, it felt like sanctuary. She didn't remember drifting off, only recalling the weight of her own mind, relentless plans, board meetings, fractal spreadsheets, until it finally surrendered in the hush of the spa. The last thing she had seen before sleep claimed her was Jack Turner's back silhouetted in the amber glow as he retreated through the treatment room door. He had offered no words, only a small folded spa blanket, an act so unassuming it had startled her. She'd curled into the throw and fallen asleep in seconds, the promise of peace cradling her. Claire shifted, and the blanket slipped from her shoulders. She reached to readjust it, but her fingers found only fabric. She lifted her arm and felt the thin, textured weave draped across her lap. His kindness lingered in that weight, a reminder that someone cared more about her rest than her resume. She stared at the closed door leading to the treatment rooms. In the deep hush, she wondered what compelled him, this man, who could have walked away to return with a blanket for her comfort. She closed her eyes and let the question drift away like the steam unwilling to disturb the fragile calm. Behind her, the door swung open softly. Claire didn't need to turn. She recognized the quiet tread of Jack's footsteps on the carpet. He paused just beyond the ribbon of light cast from the corridor. The outline of his silhouette was gentle and unguarded, far removed from the filtered images of him she'd sought online after last night's conversation. Jack's eyes met hers, warm beneath the faint constellations of exhaustion she saw there. He crossed the space without a word, carrying a second blanket that matched the first. His movements were deliberate but unhurried, as if time had slowed just for this moment. He knelt beside the sofa, eyes level with her shoulders, and draped the blanket across her back. The fabric fell softly, the edge brushing the nape of her neck. Claire felt the warmth seep into her chilled skin and turned toward him, searching for something she couldn't name, gratitude perhaps, or the spark of a connection that had nothing to do with contracts or profit margins. She swallowed the lump in her throat, a reminder that she hadn't spoken in hours. Jack gave her a small nod, the kind that acknowledged unspoken truths. He rose and stood in front of her, the steam drifting between them like a bridge. He held out a single paper cup, the kind with ridges and a plastic lid. In it was chamomile tea, mild and honeyed. For the nerves, he said, voice low. Claire accepted the cup, her fingers brushing his. The contact sent a warmth through her chest that had nothing to do with the tea. She lifted it to her lips and sipped, letting the gentle sweetness and soft bitterness root her in the moment. He settled into the chair opposite her, folding his hands in his lap, eyes never leaving hers. They sat in that stillness, connected by the simple exchange of warmth and care. Outside, the sky had lightened to a steely gray, the world beyond the spa preparing for dawn. But inside, they were suspended in a bubble of peace. Claire regarded him, finally finding her voice. "I'm sorry," she began, the words catching on her tongue like fragile paper. "I've never allowed myself to rest like this." Jack tilted his head as if to study her more closely. "You deserve it," he said. "But if you won't accept it, I'll just have to keep offering." She swallowed hard and set the cup on the low table beside her. "Why do you care?" she asked, her tone softer than before. "I'm a CEO. I have everything." Jack's gaze softened and a gentle smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "Not everything. You have power, sure, but you lost something essential along the way." He paused, choosing his words like the last drops of tea in a cup. "You lost trust in people, in yourself, in rest." Claire's breath caught. His words felt like confession and accusation all at once. She folded her hands on her lap, fingertips brushing against the soft wool of the blanket. The room smelled of eucalyptus and paper, and for the first time in years she felt a stir of vulnerability. She leaned forward, the weight of her own defenses slipping. "How can you tell?" she whispered. Jack's eyes drifted to the cabinet in the corner, then back to her. "Because I've been where you are," he said. "I've stood on stages, heard applause, held titles. And underneath it all, I was running from a fear that I wasn't enough. Until one day I realized rest was the only proof I needed." Claire studied him, his worn jeans, the faint lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and loss, the calm aura he carried like a second skin. In his presence, she felt both exposed and seen, as though the veneer of her life had been faintly polished away to reveal something raw and real. She closed her eyes, leaning back against the cushions. Jack watched her quietly, as if giving her space to breathe. The lounge lights cast soft shadows that danced across the walls. Claire let herself exhale a long, slow release of tension that she hadn't noticed she'd been holding. When she opened her eyes again, Jack was smiling just a little. "You can sleep," he said, knowing there's someone who's glad you did. Claire reached out with one hand and touched his sleeve. He didn't flinch. Instead, he met her gesture with steady calm. She closed her hand around the fabric and let her head fall gently back onto the sofa cushion. Jack rose and moved to the cabinet, retrieving a folded piece of cardstock and a pen. He scribbled a single line in address, and then slipped the note onto the table by her mug. He turned the pen over twice and set both on top, the simple act conveying more kindness than 1,000 apologies. Silently, Jack returned to the chair across from her. He folded his hands again and gave her a nod that spoke of boundaries and respect. Claire watched him memorizing the lines of his profile, the quiet strength radiating from his posture. In the silence that followed, Claire let herself drift. Her eyelids grew heavy, and the steam's gentle hiss became a lullaby. She heard the soft click of the cabinet door as Jack stepped away, leaving her in the hush. The blanket at her shoulders felt like a shield against her own doubts. She curled into it, sipping the last of her tea, and whispered, "Thank you." Jack's voice came from just beyond the glow of the diffuser, soft enough to meld with the steam. "Rest well, Claire." And with that, she closed her eyes, surrendering to the deep, healing quiet. Outside, dawn was breaking, but inside the spa lounge, time had given way to something more precious. Midnight mercy granted by a man whose presence cost him nothing, and yet offered her everything she had forgotten how to accept. Claire Hart arrived at River Wellness Spa just as the sun was lifting over the city skyline, painting the pavement in strokes of pale gold. The door chimed softly when she entered, and Jack Turner looked up from behind the reception counter as if he'd sensed her presence before she spoke. He was wiping down the maplewood desk, the towel moving in slow, deliberate strokes that reminded her of calm waves on a tranquil lake. She closed the door behind her and peeled off her damp silk coat, revealing a crisp white blouse and dark wash jeans, her armor repurposed for this uncharted territory. Jack's eyes held a silent question, and Claire nodded once, offering neither apology nor explanation. She crossed the small lobby, the scent of lavender and mint drifting around her like a gentle invitation, and took the seat opposite him. "Good morning," she said, voice steady but carrying an undertow of urgency. No mention of money, no request for a session. Jack paused, placing the rag onto the counter. He leaned forward, elbows resting on the smooth surface, gaze soft but unflinching. "Morning," he replied simply. Claire's heart pounded in her chest. She studied his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the faint stubble shadowing his cheek, the kindness in his eyes that made her feel both seen and still. She took a breath and met his gaze. "I came back," she said. "Not for a treatment." Jack nodded as though that made perfect sense. "I didn't expect you to return," he said quietly. She leaned back, folding her hands in her lap. "Why wouldn't I? I need answers." He watched her intently as though weighing every word she might speak. The spa's muted light filtered through frosted glass panels, casting a soft glow that splayed across the room in gentle patterns. "I want to know," Claire continued, "why you won't accept my money." Jack's gaze drifted to the steam rising from the diffuser behind him, mingling with the afternoon air in lazy spirals. He turned back to her, voice calm. "I told you last night I don't sell my presence." Claire pressed her fingertips into the palms of her hands, collecting courage in the silence. "That wasn't enough," she said. "I need more than a slogan. I need to understand." Jack rose and moved to a nearby cabinet, extracting 2 paper cups and a kettle from a low shelf. He set them on the counter and flicked the switch on a small tea station. The hum of the kettle filled the pause between them. Claire watched him measure loose-leaf chamomile with quiet precision. She realized he treated each action like an intentional ritual, not a rote chore. He poured steaming water into the cups, the fragrant scent rising in soft plumes. Returning to his stool, Jack handed her a cup, the heat warm against her fingers. He cradled his own. "I made a vow," he began, eyes on the swirling tea. "A vow to my daughter, Emma." Claire's throat tightened at the name. Emma. She pictured a small girl with curious eyes, images she'd conjured from the few details Jack had shared. She took a slow sip, letting the mild sweetness ground her. Jack continued, voice gentle. "When Emma was 5, I promised her that she would always know who her father is by his choices, never by his paycheck. That night, when you offered me $1 million, you weren't just offering money. You were offering a price for my silence and a chance potentially for her to think her dad could be bought." Claire felt her chest constrict. She folded her cup into her palms, aware of its fragility. "I didn't think of it that way," she whispered. "I thought I was helping you." Jack tilted his head, studying her face. I know you did, he said slowly, but help comes in many forms. Your money could have fixed 1,000 problems except the one you couldn't buy, rest that comes from trust. Claire studied the rim of her cup. She remembered the cold steel of boardroom tables, the glint of investors' eyes measuring her worth, the forced smiles in corporate gala photographs. She wondered when she had last felt trust, real trust, between two people, unfiltered. She glanced up at Jack, voice raw. I've never had that kind of help, she admitted. I've always solved my problems with resources and leverage. I was raised to believe vulnerability was a liability. Jack listened, expression open. When she finished, he set his cup on the counter and stood. He gestured toward the spa entrance. Walk with me, he offered. Claire rose, following him through the frosted doors into the spa's inner corridor. The treatment rooms lay quiet. Doors closed, lights off, as though the world beyond had paused out of respect. They walked side by side, footsteps muffled on the plush carpet. Jack stopped at a door marked Aroma Room and turned to her. I want you to see something, he said, letting the door swing inward. Inside the walls were painted a deep, calming green. Soft rugs lay atop the floor, and aromatic diffusers lined the shelves, each labeled with a simple intention, letting go deep sleep quiet. Mind. A single chaise lounge sat in the center, its linen upholstery pristine. Claire stepped inside and ran her fingers along the chaise's edge. It was straightforward, functional, but it exuded a serenity that her penthouse suite had never known. She inhaled deeply, the scent of lavender and sage enveloping her. Jack watched her quietly, then spoke. This room exists because people pay me to guide them through silence, to hold space for their unrest. But you don't need a guided silence. You need someone who doesn't expect a production. Claire turned to him, eyes glistening. And you? What do you expect? Jack stepped closer, lowering his gaze to meet hers. I expect nothing, he said simply, except maybe that you'd let yourself rest again. Claire closed her eyes, the weight of his words pressing into her like rain on thirsty soil. She felt tears slip down her cheeks, not from sadness, but from relief that someone understood her deepest exhaustion. When she opened her eyes, she saw Jack's gentle smile. Thank you, she whispered, voice thick, for showing me. He nodded, then held out his hand. Come back tomorrow, he said softly. No charge. No promises. Just rest. Claire placed her trembling hand in his. In that simple grasp, a gesture without transaction, she felt the fragile threads of her defenses begin to unwind. Outside, the city pulsed with its usual rhythm, but inside the spa's quiet corridor, time seemed to slow, honoring the space they'd created. She nodded once, firm. I'll be here, she replied. Jack released her hand and stepped back, letting her find her way. Claire lingered for a moment, breathing in the stillness of the Aroma Room before turning to leave. As she crossed the lobby, she glimpsed his silhouette behind the reception desk, watching her go with a look that was neither pity nor judgment, but something far rarer, genuine warmth. Outside, the sun had climbed higher, warming the pavement. Claire paused at the door, her hand on the handle, and allowed herself a small, unguarded smile. She felt something unfamiliar stirring the quiet flutter of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could learn to rest, not as a transaction, but as a human being deserving of care. With that thought, she stepped into the morning light, the invitation hanging between them like an unspoken promise of change. And for the first time in her life, Claire Hart walked away, not with a deal to close, but with the intention to return. Claire found herself settling into one of the 2 leather chairs positioned beside the frosted window in the spa's quiet consultation room. The pale morning light seeped through the glass, painting soft stripes across the plush carpet. Jack sat opposite her, legs crossed, hands folded neatly in his lap, the silence between them gentle rather than heavy. She clutched the arms of the chair, noticing for the first time how her fingertips itched with the need to do something, anything, to maintain control. But here control was a foreign concept. Here she was just Claire Hart, no CEO, no headlines, no quarterly reports. The room smelled faintly of sandalwood and steamed linen. Outside, the city hummed awake, but in here the air held a different rhythm, one that moved at the pace of breath and heartbeat. Claire exhaled slowly, her spine stiff and straight, in a posture she'd honed over decades. I've spent my life proving I'm strong, she began, voice low, as if confessing a secret. In boardrooms, at galas, in front of cameras, every move has been calculated to show that I'm unbreakable. She felt the lie in her own words, even as she spoke them, unbreakable. The word echoed in her mind, and she realized how heavy it had become, the weight of a title she'd worn like armor since her 20s. That armor had protected her, yes, but it had also hidden the woman beneath. Jack's gaze never wavered. He waited patient and unhurried, as though he understood fully the cost of revealing vulnerability. She looked at him, searching his expression for judgment. Instead, she saw kindness and something steadier, a sense of solid ground under her words. "It's exhausting," she admitted. "Wearing that armor every day, never letting my guard down. I've forgotten what it feels like to just be." Jack nodded once gently. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, eyes warm. "Doing is easier than being," he said softly. "It gives you a sense of purpose, a way to measure yourself. But sometimes the doing hides a deeper ache." Claire swallowed. She'd read books on leadership that praised relentless action. She'd mentored young executives to climb higher, faster, stronger. Yet here in the glow of the spa's morning light, she felt the truth of his words sink in. The ache was real. She ran a hand through her hair, the silk of her blouse whispering against her wrist. "I don't know who I am without it," she confessed. "Without the boardroom, without the applause, without the titles." He sat back, considering. Then he reached to the small wooden table between them and picked up a smooth pebble, a tactile tool he sometimes used to ground anxious clients. He turned it in his palm, feeling its weight. When he looked back at her, he held it out. "Here," he said, placing the pebble gently in her hand. "This is a reminder that you exist beyond performance. It's just a rock, but it can't be bought or sold. It has no other purpose than to be itself." Claire turned the pebble over its cool surface, cool against her skin. "It's simple," she murmured. "I've forgotten how to appreciate simple things." Jack smiled, a small knowing curve. "Some things like peace can't be bought. They must be earned." The words settled between them like a blessing. Claire closed her eyes, letting the simplicity of the moment wash over her. She thought of the cold boardroom tables she'd sat behind, the clink of crystal glasses at charity galas, the endless emails that had become her world. All of it had felt necessary, but none of it had ever felt like peace. She looked at Jack again, really looked, and saw the lines of his face softened by compassion. She saw the man who had traded prestige for pancakes with his daughter, who measured his worth by laughter rather than profit margins. She saw someone who had earned his peace through honest choices. Claire pressed the pebble into her palm, curling her fingers around it. The weight grounded her in the moment, reminding her that she too deserved to be more than her achievements. She took a breath, the first deep inhale she could remember taking without a plan attached. "I don't know how to earn peace," she whispered. "I don't even know what that looks like for me." Jack rose and moved to the cabinet at the far end of the room. He retrieved a small glass jar filled with smooth river stones, each one a different shape, a different shade of gray. He returned and placed the jar on the table. "Pick one," he invited. "Each stone can represent something you want to reclaim. Rest, honesty, presence, whatever you need." Claire hesitated, then dipped her hand into the jar. Her fingers brushed across several until she settled on one that fit snugly in her palm, its surface mottled and warm. She held it up, studying the patterns etched by time. "This one," she said, meeting Jack's eyes. "This feels like hope." He nodded, a soft smile of affirmation. "Hope is earned every morning when you choose to rest, when you choose to speak your truth, when you choose to be present." Claire allowed herself a small smile in return. She felt a flicker of something new, a sense that perhaps vulnerability could be strength, that performance and authenticity weren't mutually exclusive, that beneath the armor she'd worn so long, the woman she'd forgotten was still there, waiting to be rediscovered. She set the stone down gently on the table, as if honoring a fragile promise. "Thank you," she whispered, "for showing me this." Jack reached out and touched the jar, then the pebble, then his heart. "You've shown yourself," he said softly. "That's the first step." They sat in silence, companionable now, connected by stones and shared recognition. The muffled hum of the city beyond the window felt distant, as though the spa existed in its own peaceful realm. Claire felt a calm bloom in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with candlelight or hot tea. She realized then that cracks in her armor weren't failures, they were openings through which genuine life could enter. She thought of her responsibilities waiting in her penthouse suite board members, expecting her decisions, media, clamoring for her sound bites. None of that mattered in this room, bathed in soft light and honesty. Claire leaned back, shoulders relaxing for the first time in years. She breathed in the scent of sandalwood, the promise of quiet. She looked at Jack, gratitude shining in her eyes. I think I'm ready to start breaking my armor one piece at a time. Jack's smile was steady, his presence unwavering. And I'll be here, he said. Every time you need to remember that peace has to be earned, not bought. Claire nodded, feeling the fragile seed of trust take root. She might not know exactly where this journey would lead, but for the first time she felt the courage to find out. In that stillness, she glimpsed the woman beneath the title, the woman who had been waiting to come home to herself. The diner's neon sign buzzed like a lullaby, painting the vinyl booths in flickers of pink and teal as Claire slid into the corner seat opposite Jack. They'd chosen the Midnight Spoon for its honest charm, formica tables, black and white checkered floor coffee brewed strong enough to rip away insomnia and pies that smelled of summer orchards. A waitress in a faded denim apron dropped menus before them, already knowing their order. Jack flashed a quick smile. 2 slices of peach pie, please. Black coffee for me, tea for you. Claire nodded, glad for the simplicity. No boardrooms here, no investors waiting. No walls lined with awards, just a small-town diner humming with low conversation and the clatter of dishes. She settled back against the booth, the leather cool against her silk blouse, and watched Jack take in the familiar scene with a contented ease. When the pie arrived, 2 generous wedges nestled on white plates, steam curling around plump, syrupy fruit. Jack reached across and offered Claire the first forkful. She closed her eyes at the sweetness, the buttery crust flaking just so, and felt a soft warmth bloom in her chest. It's perfect, she murmured. He chuckled, spooning his own bite. He leaned back, gaze drifting to the neon glow dancing across the ceiling. I couldn't resist, he said. Peach is honest, it doesn't try to be something it's not. Claire smiled at his metaphor, then set down her fork and studied him. In this soft light he looked at ease in a way she'd never seen him, in the spa's ordered calm. Here among ketchup bottles and sugar dispensers she felt a kinship she hadn't anticipated. You've told me a bit about Emma, she ventured, her voice low against the diner's chatter. But not much about you before the spa life. Jack's smile softened and he spread a hand over the formica tabletop. It wasn't always quiet, he began. I used to work in finance, big bank corner office, nameplate on the door, the whole package. Claire's breath caught. He too had known that world. She leaned forward. You left that behind. He nodded. Spoon poised midair. I made good money. Enough to buy a nicer house, a new car every few years. I could have kept climbing that ladder. He took a slow sip of coffee, letting the bitterness anchor his words. But one night, after a particularly brutal quarter, I came home to find my daughter's bedroom incomplete. She'd climbed into a makeshift bed I'd cobbled together with leftover wood because I'd spent the bonus on the car. She looked at me with those big eyes and said, Daddy, I miss my bed. He paused, brushing his thumb across his mug. That was the moment I realized prestige doesn't build a home. Claire's throat tightened. She pictured a child's disappointment and felt a pang of shared regret. She too had sacrificed small moments for grander illusions. Jack continued, voice gentle. So I sold the car, traded the condo for a fixer-upper, and spent months building her room from scratch. Every board, every nail I did myself. It wasn't just carpentry, it was penance, and it was love. He looked at Claire, eyes clear. Then I opened this spa using what I learned from hospitality to help others find rest. I wanted to create a place where people could heal without feeling they owed something in return. Claire laid a hand atop his. That's incredible, she said, voice soft. I can only imagine how hard that must have been, walking away from security, from recognition. She swallowed, remembering the ease with which she'd once traded authenticity for achievement. I've never allowed myself that kind of risk. Jack shook his head. Risk is relative. Leaving behind money that didn't matter to me felt safer than living a lie. He paused and gestured at her pie. Your turn. Claire lifted her fork and took a bite, savoring the way the peaches melted against the crust. She exhaled slowly, the act of eating suddenly intimate. When I was a child, she began, my father used to say, vulnerability is weakness. He oversaw everything in our lives, school friendships, dinner conversations down to the smallest detail. If I ever showed emotion, he'd correct me as if I'd broken a rule. She set her fork down, swirling the amber syrup on her plate. I grew up believing strength meant never letting anyone see you bleed. Jack listened without interrupting his expression, a steady harbor. Claire met his gaze, her own eyes glossy. I carried that into my career. I curated every smile, every handshake, every speech. I thought if I was flawless, I'd never be hurt. She reached for her tea, the warmth, the balm. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that strength isn't the absence of pain, it's how you face it. Jack nodded, his hand covering hers. It takes courage to admit that, he said. I admire that. Claire shook her head, faint smile ghosting her lips. I admire that you found the courage before you reached my age. She paused, then met his eyes fully. Thank you for sharing your story. Her voice cracked, but in that vulnerability she found an unexpected freedom. Jack squeezed her hand gently. Your scars don't make you weak, Claire. They make you human, and that's the greatest strength of all. Claire closed her eyes, letting his words settle like sunlight after a storm. When she opened them, she saw only kindness reflected back. The diner around them continued its morning symphony. Plates scraped, coffee machines hissed, voices murmured. But here in their booth, time slowed, shaped by honesty. She leaned forward and placed her forearms on the table. I've spent so long hiding behind projections of power that I forgot how to connect. Her gaze softened. But here with you, it feels real. Jack's smile was gentle. That's because it is. Real doesn't come from perfection. It comes from showing up imperfectly, honestly. Claire drew a breath and let it out in a quiet laugh. I've spent years chasing a version of myself that I thought the world wanted, but I'm starting to think that version was someone I barely knew. Jack reached across and lifted a fragment of crust with his finger, dipping it into the leftover syrup and offering it to her. Claire took it, their fingers brushing once more. She tasted the sweetness and nodded. I think I'd like to know the real me again. He returned the gesture with another bite. And I'm here to remind you, he said, that you're worth more than any title. You're worth truth. Claire felt a surge of gratitude and something deeper hope that stretched beyond the diner's neon glow and into the life waiting outside. She sipped the last of her tea, letting its warmth carry her promise. She would learn to be vulnerable. She would unearth the woman beneath the armor, and she would earn not by the peace she so desperately needed. As they rose from the booth, plates cleared and minds lighter, Claire realized that this shared moment, pie and truth, was more transformative than any boardroom victory. It was a turning point, a seed planted in honest soil, ready to grow into a life defined by presence rather than performance. And for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to let it bloom. Claire Hart stepped out of her car into the cool afternoon air, hand clasped around Zoe's small one. The 6-year-old's bright pink sneakers scuffed the pavement as they crossed toward the spa's blue front door. Zoe's curls bounced with every step, and her eyes were wide with curiosity. She'd never been inside a day spa before, only playgrounds and school assemblies. Claire paused at the entryway, smoothing the front of her blouse, and glanced down at Zoe. You ready? She asked, voice gentle. Zoe beamed. I want to see Mr. Jack, she declared as if sharing a secret. Mommy said he's really nice. Inside the spa smelled of eucalyptus and rain-washed wood. The soft hum of the diffuser and the muted trickle of an indoor fountain greeted them like an old friend. Claire led Zoe past the reception desk where Jack Turner looked up with that calm, welcoming smile she'd come to rely on. Claire, he said, voice warm, tucking a towel behind the counter. And this must be Zoe. Zoe ran forward and threw herself into Jack's leg arms, winding around his knee. Jack knelt, arms sweeping wide to embrace her. Zoe giggled when he lifted her gently and spun her once, an ocean of delight in her laugh. Claire watched her heart softening at the sight. Jack set Zoe down and she took his hand as if they'd been friends forever. Jack guided her to the lounge sofas, the leather cushions worn in where countless guests had settled. Zoe climbed up and crossed her legs like a little diplomat. Claire stepped back into the reception area. The low light pooled at their feet, and beyond the lounge window traffic drifted by like slow currents. She inhaled deeply, aware of the gentle quiet that had become a refuge in her life. Jack motioned for Claire to join them. He poured a small paper cup of warm cocoa for Zoe marshmallows bobbing on top and handed her a second cup of chamomile tea for Claire. Zoe's nose twitched at the chocolate aroma. Claire took a sip of tea, feeling its mild sweetness calm her racing thoughts. Zoe cradled her cocoa and observed Jack quietly, head tilted to one side like a tiny judge. Claire caught his eye and saw amusement flicker across his face. He sank onto the sofa beside Zoe, folding his knees beneath him, leaning in with undivided attention. "What's your favorite part of the spa, Zoe?" he asked gently. Zoe surveyed the room, the scent of steam, the soft glow of sconces, the paintings of abstract waves on the walls. She shrugged. "I like the quiet," she said after a moment. Jack raised an eyebrow. "Quiet is good," he agreed. "What about the quiet do you like?" Zoe sipped her cocoa, eyes serious. "It feels safe, like nobody's pretending." Claire felt her breath catch. Up until a few weeks ago, she had pretended in every room she entered. Here was a child who recognized what she'd forgotten. Jack smiled and nodded. "Sometimes," he said, "we need spaces where we don't have to put on a show, where we can just be ourselves." Zoe considered that, then hopped off the sofa and skipped to the diffuser station. She sniffed at the reeds, then turned to Jack. "This one smells like sleep," she declared, pointing at the deep sleep diffuser. "I wish my mom could sleep like that." Claire's throat went dry. She remembered the long nights she'd spent staring at the ceiling. Body tense, mind churning. Zoe's observation landed like a gentle blow. Everyone around her knew she couldn't sleep. Jack walked over and knelt beside Zoe. "Your mom will learn how to sleep again," he said. "It just takes practice and patience." Zoe nodded solemnly, as if she'd been entrusted with a secret mission. Claire found herself drawn to Jack's voice, steady, reassuring, no hint of pity. He glanced back at Claire, offering a look of shared understanding. Claire cleared her throat and joined them by the diffuser station. "Zoe's mother, my friend Sandra, had an emergency today," she explained, voice light. "I offered to bring Zoe here so she can finish her papers, and I wanted someone who'd be good with her." Jack straightened, tucking a stray curl behind his ear. "I'm happy to help," he said. "Zoe's welcome any time." Zoe grinned and grabbed Jack's hand again, dragging him to the door marked Kids Relaxation Room. Jack glanced at Claire, eyebrows raised. "Is that okay?" Claire nodded. "It has soft mats and cartoons muted on a tiny screen. Zoe loves doing yoga stretches." She lifted her teacup, feeling heat leak into her fingers. Jack pushed open the door. Inside, pastel cushions and yoga mats dotted the floor. A small table held coloring books and crayons. Zoe scampered into the center and began a wobbling cat pose, arms raised overhead, tongue poking out in concentration. Jack sank onto a mat nearby and mirrored her bending forward into a child's pose. Zoe giggled when he made a playful snore. Claire leaned in the doorway, heart fluttering at their unguarded laughter. After a few moments, Zoe broke into a run toward Jack, wrapping him in a bear hug. Claire stepped fully into the room and watched them move together, light and unself-conscious, unburdened by status or expectation. She found herself wondering what it would be like to play to let go. Here was a man who didn't measure worth in resumes. He measured it in moments like this, moments that enriched rather than depleted. Zoe hopped off Jack's lap and returned to the crayons doodling hearts and stick figures. Jack watched her for a beat, then looked up at Claire. "Would you like to try?" he asked softly. Claire hesitated, then moved toward a mat. She folded her legs beneath her and mimicked a gentle cat stretch the fabric of her jeans, sighing with the motion. Zoe looked up, eyebrows furrowed in appraisal. "You're doing it wrong," Zoe announced, standing and sliding beside Claire. "You have to make your back like a rainbow." She arched her back into a perfect semicircle. Claire followed, laughing when her version came out more like a lopsided wave. Jack clapped softly. "Beautiful," he encouraged. "Can you show me again?" Zoe beamed, then took his hand and led him into a playful duo, their backs sked into reaching rainbows, laughter echoing off the pastel walls. Claire watched, heart-stirring, feeling an ache she hadn't known was there, the ache to belong, to connect without performance, to be seen as simply herself. When Zoe flopped onto her cushion afterward, she patted a spot beside her. Claire sat, legs stretching out in front of her. Jack joined too, and they ended up in a loose triangle, two adults and a child equal in their ease. Zoe handed Claire a misshapen crayon flower. "This is for you," she said proudly. Claire took it, pressing it to her chest. "Thank you, Zoe. It's beautiful." Zoe nodded sagely. "You're brave," she informed Claire. "You're like the nice ones in storybooks." Claire blinked, surprised. "Brave," she repeated. Zoe patted her hand. "Yeah, you brought me here and you're trying new things. Brave is doing things that scare you." Claire met Jack's gaze and he smiled a warm, proud curve. She realized that Jack had never asked her to be anything other than herself, and in that acceptance she'd found her own courage to step beyond the boardroom, beyond the armor, into something messy and honest. The three sat in companionable silence, then crayon drawings and forgotten pretenses strewn around them. Sunshine filtered through the blinds, painting the room in soft stripes. Claire closed her eyes, inhaling the scent of crayons and eucalyptus, allowing herself to linger in the quiet miracle of the moment. Zoe yawned and stretched. "I think I should go home now," she said. "Mommy will be okay?" Claire rose and took Zoe's hand. She gave Jack a look of deep gratitude, words shining in her eyes. "Thank you." Jack nodded, stepping forward to lift Zoe in one arm and extend the other to Claire. As they walked back through the corridor, Zoe nestled against Jack's chest, clinging to her crayon flower. Claire followed, chest full of warmth and wonder. The spa's quiet corridors felt different now, hallowed, almost the site of a transformation that had nothing to do with towels or treatments, and everything to do with simple human connection. In that child's insight, what superheroes wish they could be, Claire glimpsed the kind of hero she wanted to become, one whose strength lay not in power, but in presence, not in performance, but in compassion, not in unbreakability, but in the courage to be vulnerable and true. And as they stepped into the sunlit lobby, Claire knew that this gift, this moment, would linger far longer than any boardroom triumph ever could. Jack's home felt like stepping into a memory. The living room was modest and lived in a worn leather couch, patched with a crocheted throw bookshelves lined with dog-eared novels and framed photos, and a fire crackling low in the stone hearth. Outside, dusk draped the pines in indigo shadows, but inside the light was soft lamps glowing in corners, the kitchen clock ticking with a steady promise. Claire sank into the couch's gentle curve, the wool blanket Jack had given her at their first midnight meeting wrapped around her shoulders. The scent of simmering chicken and herbs curled through the room, and Jack stood at the counter stirring a pot with the careful attention of a man who found solace in the everyday ritual of cooking. Almost ready, he called over his shoulder, voice warm. Claire watched him leaning forward to catch a glimpse of Emma's drawings pinned above the stove stick figures dancing around a small house, each labeled in uneven letters. She smiled. Here was the life he had chosen, simple and honest, anchored in love. Jack ladled stew into two deep bowls and placed one in front of Claire on the low coffee table. The steam rose in gentle spirals, carrying the earthy scent of rosemary. He sat opposite her, his own bowl balanced on his lap, and they ate in companionable silence for a moment, spoonfuls punctuating the quiet. Claire set down her spoon and met his gaze. "You said once that fear of failing Emma drove you to leave everything behind," she began softly. "I want to understand that." Jack inhaled slowly, eyes on the flickering fire. "When Emma was born, I thought I knew what love meant. Then I watched her grow every milestone, you know, first words, first steps. I followed her every move with pride. But then there were nights I was too busy, too tired, or too far away to tuck her in." He paused and his spoon hovered midair. "The night she fell asleep on the couch because I worked late, I couldn't live with that. I feared that my ambition would cost me her trust." Claire felt a lump in her throat. That fear, it must have been overwhelming. He nodded, eyes reflective. "It was. I realized I had to choose prestige or presence. I didn't know how to do both." He brushed his hand across his jaw. "So I chose her." Claire swallowed, warmth blooming in her chest at the depth of that sacrifice. She pressed her fingers to the bowl's rim. I understand fear of failure too," she said quietly. "But mine was rewarded. My father, he taught me that power was everything. He'd tell me, 'You control the room or the room controls you. Never let them see your fear.'" Jack listened, spoon resting in his lap. Claire closed her eyes and remembered her childhood home, marble floors, hushed hallways. Her father's voice coldly precise as he lectured her on stock options and merger strategies. He groomed me to be his successor, she continued. I learned to perform strength because vulnerability meant weakness. But I never learned how to mourn, how to be broken, how to let someone in when I hurt. She paused, mind drifting to the night she'd cried herself to sleep in her penthouse, the city lights mocking her loneliness. I thought strength meant carrying every burden alone, she whispered. Until I met you. Jack leaned forward, elbows on his knees, gaze earnest. No one should carry everything alone. We need others to share the weight. Claire met his eyes, tears glistening. She felt walls she'd spent decades building beginning to crumble. I never let anyone share the weight, she admitted. And then I got good at pretending I didn't feel it. Jack set down his bowl and moved to kneel before her on the hearth's stone edge, warming his hands by the glow. Showing pain doesn't diminish strength, he said softly. It reveals it. Claire studied his face illuminated by the fire. Unspoken empathy shone in his eyes, a mirror to her own fears. She placed a hand on his shoulder. Thank you, she said, voice raw, for giving me permission to be human. He offered a small smile. Permission you already had. He reached into his pocket and brought out a small wooden music box engraved with Emma's name. He opened it and a gentle melody filled the room. Emma gave this to me for Father's Day last year, he said. She said it reminded her of lullabies. Claire's breath hitched at the sweetness of a child's gift. She watched him close the lid, the music halting like a held breath. She's lucky to have you, she said, voice catching. Jack's expression softened. I'm the lucky one. She taught me more about love than any boardroom ever could. Silence settled between them, rich with shared understanding. Claire realized how rare it was to speak so freely without calculation. Here in the glow of home and hearth, she discovered that trust grew in moments of honesty, not in orchestrated gestures. Claire reached into her bag and retrieved a worn leather journal. She opened to a blank page and pushed it toward Jack. Your turn, she said with a shaky laugh. Ask me a question. He smiled, lifting the journal. What holds you up when you feel like you might fall? Claire traced the leather cover with her fingertips. She closed her eyes, summoning the memory of her mother's hug on the day she graduated college, the echo of laughter in a sunlit garden where she'd once dared to dream. Love, she wrote. The right kind of love. The kind that doesn't demand perfection. Jack read the words and nodded. That's brave. Claire opened her eyes. I'm learning, she said, that walls kept me safe, but they also kept me lonely. Jack reached out and took her hand. We're here, he said, to help each other come down from those walls. Claire let her hand rest in his warmth, spreading through her fingers. She felt the fragile trust they'd woven in quiet evenings, a tapestry of confessions, kindness, and shared scars. The fire crackled, sending sparks dancing into the hearth, and Claire realized that in revealing her wounds she had found a way to heal. As the clock ticked softly and the stew cooled between their bowls, Claire closed her journal and leaned back, shoulder to shoulder with Jack. Outside the pines whispered in the night breeze, and inside 2 hearts sat open, no longer armor-clad, but tender and alive. Claire Hart's phone buzzed just as she was pouring a second cup of chamomile tea in Jack's kitchen. The late evening quiet wrapped around them like a blanket, and for a moment she hesitated, her thumb hovering over the screen, reluctant to break the calm. The caller ID read board office, and she felt a flutter of dread. Jack's eyes met hers across the counter, concern softening his features. She pressed accept, and her heartbeat hammered in her ears as Charles's voice slithered through the line. Good evening, Claire, he said, smooth and cold. I trust you received my little reminder. Claire's pulse quickened. What do you mean? A slow chuckle. The photo. Claire, your board has seen it. You and your massage therapist. Quite the scandal. Don't think they'll wait long before asking questions about your judgment, both personal and professional. He hung up before she could respond, leaving her staring at the blank screen as if it had betrayed her. Jack stepped closer, wrapping a hand around her shoulder. She exhaled, voice tight. He's leaked that photo from the spa lounge. They're already talking about a vote of no confidence. Jack squeezed her arm. You don't have to face this alone. Claire turned eyes glistening. I've spent my life controlling perceptions. Now my personal life is under a microscope. She set the empty teacup down with a soft clink. They're going to paint me as reckless. I'll lose my seat. Jack drew in a steadying breath. Then let them see the real you. The boardroom the next morning felt colder than any spa treatment room she'd ever entered. Marble floors gleamed under fluorescent lights, and around the long table faces she'd once counted as allies now looked wary, distant. Charles sat at the head, arms folded, a smirk playing at his lips. Reports of a dropped share price flickered on the wall monitor like a death knell. Claire stepped to the front, heels clicking against the floor, and met their eyes with her own steady gaze. I'm aware of the photo, she began, voice carrying across the silent room. Yes, that was me in a spa lounge seeking rest after months without sleep. A murmur ran through the board members. Claire let it rise and fall before continuing. I will not apologize for prioritizing my well-being. One director cleared his throat. But Ms. Hart, did you seek professional advice? This could jeopardize the company's reputation. Claire's pulse stuttered, but she held firm. My well-being is not a liability. It's a necessity. If leadership means never admitting vulnerability, then we've redefined strength poorly. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle among them. I won't step down because taking care of myself proves I understand resilience and that I can lead by example. Jack stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, his presence a silent show of support. Claire caught his eye once, and she drew courage from the warmth in his glance. Charles Rowe's voice slick. You're romanticizing burnout as bravery. The board needs someone invulnerable. Invulnerable, Claire interrupted softly, is invisible. People follow leaders they trust, not leaders who never fall. She stepped closer to the table's edge. We've weathered market dips before. We'll weather this too. I'm not hiding behind a facade. I'm owning my humanity, and I expect nothing less from the teams I lead. Silence swallowed the room. Then one by one nods appeared. The CFO cleared his throat. I respect your transparency, Claire. Another director added, if this reflects a culture of authenticity, I'm all for it. Even Charles's smirk had faded, replaced by a tense tightening of his jaw. Later, Claire and Jack emerged from the building into the bright morning sunlight. Reporters swarmed like bees, cameras clicking. Claire squared her shoulders and raised a hand in a gentle wave. Jack slipped beside her, offering a steadying presence. A microphone thrust forward, and she inhaled deeply. Good morning. I'm Claire Hart, CEO of Hartwell Enterprises. Yesterday, a private moment of mine was shared without my consent. I won't hide it or pretend it didn't happen. What happened was real. What matters is what we do next. She let her gaze sweep over the lenses and recorders. I've learned that strength grows from honesty. I'm not walking away from this role. I'm here fully present, fully human, and fully committed to our shared future. The press corps erupted into questions, but Claire answered each with the same quiet confidence. Jack stood just behind her, nodding when she thanked a reporter and listening when she promised a follow-up interview about employee wellness initiatives. When the microphones finally lowered, Jack slipped an arm around her. You were brilliant, he murmured. Claire leaned into him, relief mingling with resolve. Thank you for standing by me, he pressed a kiss to her temple. Always. And now they see what I saw all along, a woman who leads with integrity, not illusions. As the crowd dispersed and she climbed into the car, waiting to take her home, Claire knew the board's whispers had changed. They no longer spoke of scandal or weakness, but of a leader who refused to hide. In owning her story, she had protected her legacy and shown that true power lies in transparency, not control. Claire Hart stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of her penthouse, the city sprawling below like a glittering circuit board she once believed she could control. In her hand was a worn leather-bound box, the kind her father had given her on her 21st birthday, its hinges faintly creaking as if reluctant to reveal their secrets. She set it on the glass-topped coffee table and knelt beside it, lifting the lid with a mixture of reverence and trepidation. Inside lay dozens of handwritten letters, each tied with a ribbon that had yellowed at the edges. She traced the looping script on the topmost envelope. For Claire on long nights when you feel alone. She untied the ribbon and eased the letter free, the scent of aged paper and cedar wafting up like a long-forgotten lullaby. Settling onto the plush rug, she unfolded the first page. Her father's precise handwriting danced across the sheet. My dearest Claire, you arrived on a winter's morning with a cry that told me you would never be silent. You have always spoken your truth loudly, fiercely, brilliantly. Yet I worry I taught you that silence is weakness, that power is measured by volume. If you read this, know that in my quiet moments I heard you, and I am proud of the woman you've become. Her throat tightened. She remembered his portrait in the boardroom's stern jaw, steady gaze, but never imagined the warmth in his words. Tears pricked her eyes as she glanced around the room. Sleek furniture, abstract art, the steady hum of the metropolis. All symbols of success, all once vital to her identity, now felt as distant as echoes in an empty hall. She stood carrying the letter to the writing desk by the window. The late afternoon light tinted the pages gold as she smoothed them against the grain of oak. A second letter followed. I regret the walls I built around you. I believed vulnerability was a trapdoor, but I see now it is a gateway to connection. I wish I had taught you that strength can live in softness. Forgive me, Claire. Claire's breath came in shallow gusts. Forgive him. She closed her eyes, recalling the day he handed her the company keys with those chilling words. If you fail, you'll do it alone. If you win, don't expect applause. In that moment, she had resolved never to fail, never to need anyone, never to rest. It had been a lonely triumph. She fingered the ribbon of a third letter. When you felt forgotten in the boardroom, no, I never forgot you. I just feared that sharing my pride would weaken your resolve. Now I see that love is not a liability, it is the greatest asset. Claire let out a sob she hadn't welcomed in years. The walls around her heart, erected brick by brick under his tutelage, were crumbling at last. She sank to the desk chair, clutching the letters to her chest, and closed her eyes, letting her father's voice bridge the chasm between past mistakes and future possibilities. Minutes passed in heavy silence. Then Claire reached for her laptop, its screen dark until she tapped a key. The familiar login faded into a blank document. She began to type, her fingers hesitating at first, then gaining momentum. I have spent my life chasing what I believed mattered: titles, wealth, influence. Yet every accolade has reminded me how hollow success feels without purpose. My father's letters have shown me that legacy is not built on balance sheets, but on hearts touched and lives changed. She paused, staring at the blinking cursor. The penthouse, the symbol of her triumphs, no longer felt like home. It was an island where she measured worth by numbers and metrics. But beyond its walls was a world of real needs. Parents up late, wondering how to feed their children, innovators with big dreams and no capital. People like Jack Turner, who traded boardrooms for bedrooms built with love. Claire's fingers danced again, laying out a vision. Tomorrow I launch the Hartwell Foundation for Single Parents and Dreamers. We will provide grants to parents juggling work and childcare mentorship, to those reclaiming their lives, and resources to entrepreneurs with vision but no safety net. We will honor the courage of those who dare to be vulnerable and celebrate strength born of compassion. Each word felt like the promise of a new beginning. She looked up at the city lights beginning to flicker on windows, alight with countless human stories. She whispered to herself, "This is what matters." A soft knock on the doorframe pulled her from her reverie. Jack stood there holding 2 mugs of chamomile tea. His gaze was tender, aware of the weight she carried. He set a mug beside her keyboard and slid onto the arm of the desk chair, careful not to crowd her space. "What are you working on?" he asked, his voice a quiet anchor. Claire pointed to her screen. "I'm renouncing the CEO spotlight," she said, her voice trembling with conviction. "I'm founding something that matters, something rooted in the lessons my father failed to teach, but which I refuse to forget." Jack read the words, eyes bright with pride. "A foundation," he said, tasting the phrase. "For people like Emma and Zoe, and families who need a chance." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I want to make sure no one feels the loneliness I felt. I want to fund small dreams before they fade under the weight of expectations. I want to build spaces where people can rest without judgment, where they can learn that strength and vulnerability are partners, not enemies." Jack reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "That's the most powerful thing I've ever heard you say," he murmured. "We need that world, Claire. I know I do." She leaned into him, warmth blooming in her chest. "You taught me that real strength is earned, not bought. Now I want to help others earn theirs. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, and she rested her head against his. Together they sipped their tea in companionable silence, the hum of the city below, now a gentle reminder of all the lives they might touch. Claire returned to her keyboard and drafted the first official statement. The Hartwell Foundation is committed to redefining success by investing in the resilience of single parents and aspiring changemakers. We believe that by nurturing vulnerability and community, we can forge a legacy of compassion and opportunity that outshines any corporate achievement. She formatted the text and set it to send first thing in the morning, imagining the impact of that announcement on lives waiting to be recognized. She closed her eyes, picturing Emma's laughter, Zoe's wide-eyed wonder, and the countless others who might find hope in a grant or mentorship. When she opened them, Jack was watching her with a soft smile. "You're going to change everything," he said. Claire glanced around her penthouse, its sleek surfaces and expensive art reframed by her new purpose. She felt a fierce joy more vivid than any boardroom victory. "I hope so," she replied. "But I know this is just the beginning." Jack kissed the top of her head, and she closed the laptop, its screen fading to black. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the cityscape that once defined her worth. Now it felt like a canvas awaiting new stories, stories of resilience, compassion, and second chances. Claire Hart pressed her forehead to the cool glass and took a deep breath, the letters from her father safe in her hand. The city lights danced below, reflecting the spark of something real and lasting in her heart. In that moment, she understood that success wasn't a title to hold, but a life to live, and she was ready to redefine it on her own terms. The evening air was soft and warm, scented with honeysuckle and fresh-cut grass. Overhead, dozens of string lights arched between the pines, their golden glow forming a delicate canopy above Jack's backyard. A mismatched collection of folding chairs ringed the lawn, some painted pastel, others plain white, each occupied by someone who had watched Claire Hart and Jack Turner's story unfold. There was no red carpet, no marble altar. Instead, a simple wooden arch entwined with wildflowers and eucalyptus twigs marked the spot where they would stand. Claire stepped onto the grass, bare feet brushing against the cool blades. In her hand, she held a small bouquet of daisies and lavender picked that afternoon from her own windowsill garden. Emma, radiant in a tulle skirt that brushed her knees and a crown of tiny blossoms, marched ahead of her scattering petals with careful deliberation. Each toss was punctuated by her whispered giggle, and Claire's heart swelled with a fierce tenderness. Jack stood under the arch, his usual calm replaced by the quickening heartbeat Claire heard in his chest. He wore a charcoal linen jacket over a crisp white shirt, no tie, no cufflinks, embracing a simplicity that spoke volumes. As Emma finished her flower girl duties, she ran to Jack's side and slipped one hand into his. He squeezed her small fingers and knelt to brush a loose curl from her forehead. Claire took a steadying breath and approached memories of every quiet conversation and shared confession guiding her steps. The guests rose as she reached Jack, and she settled into the heat of the moment, feeling the glow of lights and eyes shining on them. Jack reached out to tuck a stray strand of hair behind Claire's ear. "You look perfect," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. Claire smiled, her own throat tight. "So do you." They turned to face their small circle of family and friends. Emma's mother, Sandra, wiping happy tears, Zoe clutching her crayon flower, a handful of Jack's massage clients who had become confidants, and a few board members of Hartwell Enterprises who'd swapped power ties for party dresses. Jack cleared his throat softly. "Claire," he began, "from the moment you walked into my spa, you've taught me more about courage than any storm I've weathered. You showed me that strength isn't built on lightning bolts of wealth, but on steady pulses of truth. I promise to stand beside you in silence and in laughter, to hold you when you falter, and to remind you daily that you're more than any title you've carried." He reached for Claire's hand, his thumb brushing her knuckles. "I vow to build our home on presence, not performance, and to love you with the authenticity you've given me." Claire's eyes glistened as she lifted her gaze to him. "Jack, you've been my compass when I lost my way. You taught me that rest is a right, not a reward, and that vulnerability doesn't make you weak, it makes you real. I promise to honor your kindness with gratitude, to share your burdens as you've shared mine, and to be your partner in every sunrise and storm. I choose you not for what you do, but for who you are, steady, true, and unafraid to be seen. As they exchanged these vows, the string lights dipped and shimmered as though leaning in to witness the moment. Emma watched them solemnly, then tugged on Jack's sleeve. He knelt and whispered something that made the little girl giggle before she scampered back to her mother. When Claire slipped the simple silver band onto Jack's finger, everyone erupted into applause, gentle and genuine, as if each clap carried a blessing. Jack then placed a matching ring on Claire's hand, his touch steady and reverent. They sealed their promises with a soft kiss, and the world exhaled. Somewhere in the backyard, a breeze rustled through the pines, carrying the scent of lavender and hope. The officiant announced them husband and wife, but there was no readout of titles, only the truth of two people uniting their stories. Jack took Claire's hand and led her to a small table where a homemade cake stood. Its frosting was imperfectly spread, adorned with fresh berries and sprigs of mint. They cut the first slice together, fingers brushing, and fed each other bites in playful defiance of ballroom formality. Laughter bubbled between them, sweet as the sugar on their lips. Emma hopped onto a low bench and declared, "This is the best wedding ever." Zoe nodded beside her, nodding vigorously, her crayon flower bobbing with each emphatic motion. Claire caught Jack's eye and raised her eyebrows in mock exasperation. "You turned our special day into a children's theater," she teased, but her smile was full of love. Jack shrugged, grinning. "They're the heart of this moment." As dusk deepened into a velvet blue, fairy lights twinkled like distant stars. Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out a battered harmonica. He cleared his throat and played a tender melody they had first heard on that rainy night when Claire confessed her armor had cracked. His notes drifted through the trees, weaving around the guests, and Claire pressed her head against his shoulder, feeling the music in her bones. When the last note faded, Jack set the harmonica aside and extended his hand. "May I have this dance?" he asked softly. Claire accepted, rising from the bench. They swayed slowly in the circle of light, their bodies sinking in a rhythm that had been built through countless conversations and shared cups of tea. There was no choreographed routine, no spotlight, just the dance of two people who had found their way back to trust. Sandra joined Emma and Zoe nearby, the three of them spinning in a clumsy waltz of their own design. Claire glanced over and laughed, tears sparkling in her eyes. She turned back to Jack, feeling gratitude for every moment that led them here. He leaned in, voice low. "I love you," he murmured. Claire closed her eyes, savoring the weight of those words. "And I love you," she replied. "More than any chapter I've ever written." They stood entwined under the lights until it felt like time had folded inward. Guests drifted toward them, offering hugs and congratulations. Claire's former board members embraced her with genuine warmth, remarking on the power of authenticity. Jack's clients cheered as Zoe presented them with fresh petals, a final flourish of childhood blessing. When the last guest departed, promising to return with casseroles and stories, Claire and Jack remained alone, the backyard silent, except for the echo of memories they carried. Jack picked up Emma, whose eyelids drooped from excitement and sugar. Claire draped a cozy blanket over their shoulders, the three of them huddled together on the bench. Claire looked around at the string lights above and the forgiving night sky beyond. She pressed her cheek against Jack's and whispered, "This is home." Jack kissed the top of her head and answered, "Home is where we show up, not where we perform." Emma stirred and looked between them. "Can we have cake again tomorrow?" she asked sleepily. Claire smiled. "Yes, but maybe in the morning with waffles." Jack chuckled and kissed Emma's forehead. "It's a deal." As they sat under the lights, Claire felt a gentle certainty settle in her chest. Tonight wasn't the fairy tale she once imagined. It was something richer, an honest wedding built on presence, compassion, and the unwavering promise to be seen. And in that quiet backyard beneath a canopy of light and love, Claire and Jack began the rest of their lives exactly as they'd always wanted together, unguarded and wholly themselves. Claire Hart leaned against the frosted windowpane, her breath fogging the glass in gentle swirls as the first flakes of the season drifted down from a leaden sky. Below the backyard of Jack's cottage was a tableau of white pine branches, bowed under the snow's weight string lights, twinkling like constellations against the gathering dusk. Inside, the air hummed with warmth and laughter. Emma Turner sat at the low coffee table, legs crossed beneath her, a chipped mug of hot cocoa cradled in her small hands. Her cheeks glowed pink from sugar and cold, and wisps of steam curled from the surface of the milk chocolate swirl. She raised the mug in a toast to her mother, sweet cocoa lips parting in a grin. Claire joined in, lifting her own cup of spiced apple cider and savoring the quiet joy of the moment. Behind them, the television played footage from that morning's ribbon-cutting ceremony, the grand unveiling of the Hartwell Foundation's new Family Resource Center. A row of chairs lined the entrance, seated with single parents and Dreamer Fellows entrepreneurs whose fledgling ideas now carried seed funding and mentorship. Claire watched herself on screen standing at the podium, scarf loosely draped around her neck, olive green coat buttoned against the chill, speaking into a mic with a resolve that felt both foreign and wholly right. "We stand here today," her recorded voice declared, "not to celebrate profit margins, but to champion the quiet courage of those who dare to build when the world tells them they can't." On either side of her, Jack beamed in a navy peacoat, Emma perched on his hip, tiny gloved hand wrapped around the scissors handle. As the ribbon fell and the crowd applauded, Claire felt her heart swell, not from success, but from purpose. A light rap at the door drew Claire's gaze back to the cottage. Jack turned from the hearth where a fire had crackled low and opened the door to a soft snowfall drifting in. Zoe stood framed in the doorway, cheeks rosy, holding a plate of freshly baked cookies. "I thought we'd need snacks for cocoa refills," Zoe announced, stepping inside and placing the plate on the table. She peered at the screen behind Claire and broke into a wide smile. "That was your foundation, right?" "It looks amazing." Claire nodded, brushing a falling curl behind her ear. "Thanks to everyone who believed in it, including you, Zoe. You reminded me who needed to be seen." Zoe hopped onto the arm of the couch and offered Claire a cookie. "And look how happy Emma is." Emma giggled and took Zoe's hand, pulling her close for a hug. Claire watched the two of them, childhood companions bound by innocence and imagination, and felt the irreplaceable gift of belonging. Jack returned from the entryway, closing the door against the cold. He draped a soft wool shawl over Claire's shoulders and nestled beside her, wrapping an arm around her waist. "You did it," he whispered. "You built something more than a legacy. You built a home for dreams." Claire rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat that had become her compass. She thought of the penthouse windows she once looked out of, framed by glass and steel, distant from the people whose lives she wanted to touch. Here snowflakes fell against the pane like silent prayers, and inside every note of laughter, every offered scarf, every shared mug of warmth was testament to a different kind of miracle. The television shifted to interviews with Foundation Fellows. A single mother who'd secured funding to expand her home-based daycare, a young veteran launching a community garden, a former teacher creating literacy programs for refugee families. Each story unfolded in humble settings: kitchens, community halls, city parks, places identical to the ones Claire and Jack had transformed in their own lives. She watched the hope in their eyes, resonance in their voices, and felt a surge of gratitude. Not for the spotlight she'd once craved, but for the chance to redefine what mattered. Titles and numbers had once been her currency. Now currency was human connection. Emma climbed onto Claire's lap, cocoa mug pressed between them. "Mama," she said, voice muffled by marshmallows. "Does everyone get a ribbon?" Claire smiled, wrapping her arms around her daughter's small frame. "If they want one, yes," she replied softly. "Every ribbon is a celebration of someone's courage." Jack leaned forward, picking up a half-finished cookie. "And what about our ribbon?" he asked, breaking a piece and offering it to Claire. She accepted it, savoring the warmth of ginger and sugar, and pressed a kiss to his cheek. "Our ribbon is now everywhere," she said. "In every center we open, every life we touch. It's woven into the stories of single parents who find community and dreamers who learn that vulnerability can be a bridge, not a barrier." Zoe hopped off the couch and tugged on Claire's sleeve. "Can I come back tomorrow? I want to help with more cookies." Claire laughed and tousled Zoe's hair. "Of course. There's always room for more kindness and more cookies." Snow swirled outside the world beyond, reduced to soft grays and whites. Inside, a small family coalesced around warmth and purpose. Claire followed Jack's gaze to the window where the lights of his cottage cast a golden halo against the snowfall. She realized that the proudest legacy she could leave behind wasn't in the towering offices or the bottom line, but in this moment, simple, human, authentic. She rose and walked to the window, placing a hand against the cold glass. The snowflakes clung to the pane like tiny crystals, each one unique, a quiet miracle of nature. Claire exhaled, and her breath mingled with theirs, pooling in a shared space of comfort. Jack joined her, and their hands found each other's. "You're shining," he murmured, voice tender, "like the ribbon you cut today." Claire pressed her cheek to his shoulder, feeling the steady warmth that had become her anchor. "This," she whispered, "is what I wanted all along. Peace, belonging, and the courage to be seen." Emma wrapped her arms around their legs, and Zoe placed her small shoulder against Claire's, forming a tableau of four souls united in hope. The fire crackled. The kitchen clock ticked in perfect time, and beyond the window the snow fell like blessings. Claire closed her eyes, letting the moment sink in. She would remember this night, the laughter of children, the scent of cookies and cocoa, the glow of lights against the snow, and the quiet knowing that true miracles often come softly in acts of presence rather than performance. In that stillness she found her truest legacy, not as a CEO who commanded boardrooms, but as a woman who chose humanity over hierarchy and compassion over control. And for the first time in her life, she understood that choosing peace was the greatest triumph of all.